This is the Meetinghouse with Dwight A. Moody. News, reviews, commentary, and conversation on religion and American life. Now, here is Dr. Moody.
And hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. 1 week into 2022. I am Dwight Moody, your host for the Meetinghouse, where we have conversation on religion and American life. Coming to you today from Travelers Rest, South Carolina, a little community just north of Greenville, South Carolina, and about 30 miles south of Hendersonville, where I have been broadcasting from for about a year. Today, January the 6th, a historic day in American history, the first anniversary of the Capitol insurrection of 2021. I'm interested in it because there was a religious rhetoric, religious movements, religious convictions undergirding much of what happened a year ago. And all across the country, media, political and public policy organizations from all across the political spectrum are giving attention to this event. Why it happened, what it means, what it portends. I'm interested in all of this. We're going to talk about it in the Meetinghouse, and I welcome you for this first broadcast of the new year 2022 and of this new series, which I'm launching today. Thank you for tuning in today, or thank you for listening later on as a podcast. This will be posted as an audio podcast within 24 hours, and you can find it on my website at themeetinghouse.net. We're coming to you, as we always do, over radio, YouTube, streaming live on Facebook at themeetinghouse.net, and on my Facebook page, also St. Stephen's Live. You can share this broadcast on your Facebook page. That would help us get out the word. We're also broadcasting on radio out of Brunswick, Georgia, my studio of origin, I might say. You can always hear the broadcast on rejoiceradio975.com. And they're broadcasting on 97.5 FM in Brunswick, 94.7 FM, St. Simon's Island. I'm going to have a lot more to say about Brunswick a little later in the show, about what is happening there tomorrow and what that means. And at the end of the show, if I have time, I'm going to read my commentary. It's a humorous look at the trials and tribulations of moving all the stuff that a minister accumulates. It's entitled, "It's All Up for Sale." I meant it to be humorous, but I'm surprised at how many people took it so seriously. But on this beautiful day, full of snow around the country, including in Kentucky, where we're broadcasting, I welcome back to the Meetinghouse my friend and colleague, Tom Krattenmaker of New Haven, Connecticut. He's the Director of Public Relations for Yale Divinity School, one of the premier schools of theology in all of the country, and has been for a very long time. Tom is also a regular columnist for the USA Today newspaper. Many of you read his columns. And he's the author of an excellent book entitled Confessions of a Secular Jesus Follower, which I read and reviewed when it came out a few years ago. Tom, welcome back to the Meetinghouse.
Happy New Year, Dr. Moody. I'm happy to see you, although it feels funny to say happy today, given that it's the 1 year anniversary of the terrible things that happened at the Capitol, which I know we're going to be talking about.
Yes, we've all been looking at the pictures. I've scrolled through a lot of pictures today taken on that day. It was such a sobering day. Where were you when it happened?
At the home office, just plugging away, doing my work.
Yes,
couldn't quite believe what was unfolding on the television set.
Yes, I was at home too and watching it on television. And like you, I couldn't believe what was happening. And
right.
Of course, it has been the top story. I've looked at a number of lists over the last couple of weeks from media outlets. The insurrection and its aftermath, of course, the top news story, both in secular news and religious news of 2021. And that's why we're beginning with it today.
Well, it is good to call attention to the religious dimension of the debacle. And I know we'll get into that, but that aspect of it, like the fact of it happening itself, must not be forgotten.
That's exactly right. So I'm going to start with all the news today, brought to you by PerfectoCoffeeInc.com of California, one of my sponsors out in California. We're always glad when they're watching and listening. I hear from them on almost every week saying that they have caught at least part of the show. And Bruce and Jennifer, we send you greetings and Happy New Year. Thank you for being our partner, and God bless you and prosper your work. PerfectoCoffeeInc.com. So we're going to start today in Washington, D.C. January the 6th is the anniversary of the mob attack on the Capitol of Washington, D.C. By any measure, it has been the number one story of the year in any category, and certainly in the category religion and American life. Among the very first journalistic responses to that day 1 year ago was a column drawing attention to the religious elements of what is now known as the insurrection. Quote, there were crosses, Jesus saves signs, and Jesus 2020 flags that mimic the design of the Trump flags, wrote Robert P. Jones, scholar, best-selling author, and Meetinghouse guest. Quote, some of the participants organized as part of a Jericho march blew shofars, that is Jewish ritual horns, as they circled the Capitol, reenacting the siege of the city of Jericho by the Israelites. And one video showed a Christian flag being paraded into an empty congressional chamber after the doors had been breached and members of Congress evacuated, end quote. Among the one-year commemoration events is an ecumenical interracial prayer service hosted by the National Community Church in Washington, D.C., and organized by leaders of the Assemblies of God and the Church of God in Christ, the former being a mixed racial network, one of the largest religious networks in the world, and the latter, the Church of God in Christ, largely a Black denomination, a Black Pentecostal, both of these Pentecostal groups, and very numerous. Well, Tom, you and I were watching it, as we said a minute ago. And what were your feelings at the time? Do you remember?
Like you, I was struck by how prominent a role religion played. Mm-hmm. But and I'm glad, as I said a minute ago, I'm glad you're calling attention to that, Dwight. But is it really religion? I think what we saw wasn't Christianity so much as Christian nationalism on display. And of course, that is Christian in iconography only, or in symbolism only. And as you know, it bears zero resemblance to the character and values of Jesus and the meaning of the Christian faith. You know, you were talking about commentary pieces. Well, part of my world in the immediate aftermath of that disaster was that my boss, who was the dean here at Yale Divinity School, he pursued a commentary about the religious dimension or the Christian nationalism dimension, which ended up being published at CNN a few days later. It's posted today again on the YDS Facebook page and Twitter if people want to check it out.
I do want to check it out.
Said in that piece was that this religious imagery and rhetoric made a mockery of Christianity. And I think that's right. And yes, this is an aspect of that day of infamy that must not be forgotten. But I'm disappointed. I don't know how much soul searching and repentance has happened in the 365 days since this debacle.
No, not in the religious, very little in the political realm. And I think some of the perpetrators, some of them, not all by any means, have been remorseful and repentant and feel like they were used, but that's not true of many, or perhaps even most. And on the religious front, I don't think there's been any repentance on it. I think it has emboldened the networks. Actually, many of them located squarely within the Pentecostal charismatic movement, which for which I think the Assemblies of God sponsoring this prayer service, ecumenical prayer service in Washington, D.C. is a peculiar juxtaposition with where many of their own people are. The chief Pentecostal website in the country is charismanews.com, headquartered down in Orlando, Florida. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. But no, I think, if anything, the religious movement that undergirded the insurrection is stronger, more defiant, more determined. And we're going to talk about some of that here in just a few minutes. But let's go to Chicago for a very different story. Cardinal Blase Kupich of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago. He's the Archbishop of Chicago. Kupich has issued new guidelines for parish priests on the use of older pre-Vatican II worship elements. The Archbishop was responding to a document from the Vatican's Office of Public Worship, what they call the Congregation for Divine Worship, and that was published on December the 18th. Expressly forbidden in both documents, both the diocesan guidelines and the Vatican document, is the use of a very popular prayer among Catholics called the Prayer of St. Michael. Vatican II was the General Council of Bishops that met in Rome from 1962 to 1965, and it directed that the old Latin Mass, that is, the Mass in the Latin language, be replaced by the language of the people in any parish. The Latin Mass has been allowed in extraordinary circumstances. Of course, it was very popular with older people, but in recent years, it has been associated with the rise of the conservative anti-Pope Francis elements within the church. The clampdown on the Latin Mass and on the prayer of St. Michael in Chicago and around the world are widely viewed as efforts to prevent further division in the Roman Catholic Church. Tom, sometimes we think that it's largely the Protestant world and the white evangelical world that's caught up in this cultural divide, these cultural wars, as we call them. But everything we see in the Protestant world is mirrored in the Catholic world. They have their progressives, they have their conservatives. Sometimes they elect a progressive pope like Francis, and sometimes they elect a conservative pope like John Paul II.
Right. Much of what's happening in the country and even in the world is mirrored in what we see in the Catholic Church. But here's one difference. As you know, white evangelicals strongly skew toward conservatism in politics.
Right.
And if you look at like Unitarian Universalists, they skew liberal.
Right.
The Catholic Church doesn't skew one way or the other.
Right.
It's sort of, I don't know if evenly divided is the right word, but it's definitely divided.
It is divided and pretty evenly, I think.
Pretty evenly, right.
Yeah.
And I continue to be fascinated by Pope Francis. It's been quite a while now since he became Pope. I was surprised when he became Pope. I was surprised that he was chosen.
Yeah.
I'm continually struck by the enthusiasm that he generates in some quarters, but the equally enthusiastic pushback that he gets in other quarters. You know, many folks, including people like me, think he's been a breath of fresh air.
Right.
But there's also this determined resistance to things like his greater openness to LGBT people and divorced women, for example, care for the environment, where he's been a strong proponent. So I don't know. What do you think, Dwight? On the whole, do you think Francis and Francis-style Catholicism are prevailing, or is it more of a stalemate?
There's no doubt that the Catholic Church has struggled in the wake of Vatican II. The Vatican II decrees, not just on worship, in demanding that worship be done in the vernacular rather than in the Latin Mass, but in other decrees having to do with Mary, with Jews, with Protestants, were revolutionary, and it's taken the church a long time. It's been 60 years, almost 60 years since the end of Vatican II, and the church is still divided over it. And Francis is determined to be a post-Vatican II pope. All of the popes have had to be, to one extent or another, but he certainly is the most aggressive. And of course, we've seen his influence recently on the whole issue of whether President Joseph Biden can take communion in a Catholic church. Joseph Biden, a very devout Roman Catholic, but supports public abortion policies. And there's a lot of Catholic bishops and pastors who would like to deny him and other politicians communion, the Eucharist. And Francis has pushed back against this.
Thankfully.
Yes, I think sometimes I refer to him as my Pope. I'm enamored by him. I've read a lot of his books. I watch his videos. I read his prayers. I followed his pastoral visit to the United States. That must have been in 2016, 15 or 16. The president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops at the time, and therefore his chief host, is a close personal friend of mine, Archbishop Joseph Kurtz of Louisville, Kentucky, and we have talked about this. Yes, I'm very interested in what's going on in the Catholic Church because it does influence the whole world. It's the largest organization in the world, as you know.
And Catholicism at its best has so much to offer. It's such a constructive and positive force at its best. And I'm continually struck by Catholics I know who are often frustrated with the church. And when I say this, I'm thinking about women I know who think women should be ordained, but they don't quit the church. They hang in there and they still love Catholicism and they're trying to change it. And their devotion to it is fierce and impressive.
And many Protestants continue to convert to Catholicism. I had 2 converts from the Baptist world to Catholicism on my show this past year. And I plan to interview them both again. It still has a compelling attraction to a lot of people. We should talk about that more at length sometime because they certainly are an influential organization in the world and in the United States.
Yeah, let's come back to that. And I'm interested too in what seems to be the reality that a lot of the most high profile Catholics in America these days, politically involved Catholics, are converts. They came to the church as adults.
That is true.
Interesting phenomenon. So we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to it. Let's go out to Denver. This is such an interesting story. The wildfire that emerged around Denver to destroy almost 1,000 homes on the outskirts of Denver is now believed to have started in or near a shed on property owned by a Christian group known as the 12 Tribes. I did a little research on this and I want to read from their website. The 12 Tribes is an emerging spiritual nation. We are a confederation of 12 self-governing tribes made up of self-governing communities. By community, we mean families and single people who live together in homes and on farms. We are disciples of the Son of God, whom we call by his Hebrew name, Yeshua. We follow the Old and New Testament scriptures and live like the early disciples in Acts chapters 2 and 4. With all of our hearts, we want to do our Father's will, which is to love one another, be a light to the nations, so that they could see our love of life and know how much their Creator loves them, end quote. 12 tribes communities can be found in Europe, South America, Asia, and the United States, particularly in the Northeast. They've got several farms in Vermont and in the Northwest and in the Middle West, like around Denver. And they have a farm just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. I had never heard of this organization, this network, but I am familiar with the mood and the motivation and the theology behind it. They evidently live on what we would call communes. The reference to Acts chapter 2 and chapter 4, Tom, are descriptions of the early Christian movement where they held all things in common. And if anybody was poor and needed food to eat, they would feed them. So this is implying, and I think stating, that all these farms and communities around the world are communal in nature, where there's probably no private property, and decisions about the welfare of people are made in common. Had you ever heard of these groups?
No, I was going to point that out. It's so interesting that you introduced this element to the story. I had not known about the 12 tribes before they came up in connection with this terrible fire. But I'm kind of confused. So this shed, what happened, Dwight? Are they suspected of deliberately setting it on fire, or did something go wrong?
I don't know that. And I don't think the 12 tribes has issued any statement. I don't know whether the authorities in Denver have issued a statement. This story comes out of a video that has gone viral that shows the fire in the shed, and they think this is where the fire started. So of course, it'll take months for the authorities to do an official investigation, but they can pinpoint these things so narrowly and closely. It amazes me. And if it does turn out to be, let's hope it was an accident. Surely it was an accident.
I would really hope so, but even then, terribly irresponsible and with terrible consequences.
Terrible consequences. Whether it was the result of the kind of neglect that we saw out in California with the California Power and Light Company, not taking care of their lines out there and not keeping them clean and clear. They've had to pay huge fines out in California. I don't know about this community, whether this story will hold up, but it is fascinating. These people, they identify with the 12 tribes. There's been a long history of this in Christian culture, of people wanting to identify with the 12 tribes of Israel, wanting to continue their identity. And this has been a feature, not a prominent feature, but a feature in Christian theology and Christian community for many, many centuries. Even though this group, I think, is fairly new.
Right. Well, both you and I are being careful not to say that, they started the fire or something like that.
Right.
I can't let the story go by without noting what I believe is the real culprit in the terrible, terrible fire. And that's the climate chaos that we've created on this planet. In that part of Colorado, they've been going through a severe multi-year drought. And that created the super dry conditions that helped allow that fire to spread so rapidly and so destructively.
Yes, I've done a couple of shows on that. We need to come back to that because many people think that is the chief issue, moral, political, economic, legal issue facing the world, not just the United States, but the whole world.
Either an issue or a through line that runs through all issues.
Right.
But you probably know from my writing that I care a lot about climate change. I'm really worried about it. And it probably is the most important thing, big picture, in this generation.
Absolutely. Now to Virginia Beach, a very different kind of story. Be in Media, owner of such popular websites as BeliefNet and Pathos, has implemented an editorial policy that pushes bloggers to focus their attention on helping people, quote, live their most fulfilled lives, end quote, and avoid writing negative things about religion. As a result, some 20 bloggers abandoned the sites during the last days of 2021, and most of them have followed fellow blogger Hemant Mehta, known as the Friendly Atheist. to a new platform known as Only Sky Media. It's set to launch later this month. These writers reflect the growing population of non-religious or irreligious people in the United States, now estimated to be 29% of the population, up from 19% just 10 years ago. One departing editor, Dale McCowan, said, quote, "This was a business decision. It may have been hard for Pathos to attract advertising among religious businesses while at the same time providing a forum for atheists to criticize religion," end quote. What do you think about this, Tom?
So this edict, I mean, I get it. It's a bad look. But I also understand why BN Media would make a move like this. Speaking of Hemant Mehta, I know him. I really like the guy, and I've had lots of friendly interactions with him. And so it's true that he's the friendly atheist. But I do see that a lot of his posts aren't so friendly. You know, he's always on the lookout for acts of hypocrisy by religious conservatives. And as we know, there's always plenty of that to find and skewer. And I would say that there is a place for that. But to me, it gets kind of predictable after a while, kind of old hat. You know, I'm less interested in taking shots at religion. I guess I'm sounding sympathetic toward BN Media. You know, I'm less interested in taking shots at religion and more interested in exploring what non-theists do believe in and what they're trying to create in secular spaces. So it sort of makes sense to me, perhaps surprisingly.
Yes, because you know, you've written, your book is right down this pike. Am I not right?
Right. The whole context for it is, you know, my moving around in humanist and secular circles and really appreciating the context I've been in. You know, in the Yale humanist community, there was a slogan that said that we used, and it said, "There's so much more to being non-religious than what you don't believe,"
yes,
quote unquote. And then that tees up the next question. Well, what do you believe, and what are you about, and what are you up to, and what is the positive articulation of secular life? And you know, Dwight, that's an extremely important question, especially in view of those stats that you cited a minute ago. What, 29% of the population now identifies as non-religious? And so that could be that's a vacuum. What's going to fill that space in terms of meaning and community and life-affirming activities?
We need to do some shows on this, Tom.
That's right up my alley. Count
It's
me
right
in.
your alley. You need to help me recruit some of these national spokespersons, and we'll do a series on it. How about that?
It's important. I commend you for thinking of that. That would be a real contribution. And I think that listeners who are more traditionally Christian will find that it's not really so much of a threat, and that a lot of the non-religious people, probably most, if not all, really do care about being good and doing good. But it's a new thing, and the institutions and the practices and the norms just have not been fully developed, far from it. But that needs to happen.
And of course, many of them, like yourself, still find in religious figures like Jesus people of inspiration and wisdom and guidance for our living today.
Right. And there's no, in those circles, there's no strong desire to toss out religion, but rather to see what's good about it and find ways to do similar things, albeit in a secular way or non-theistic way. But a big belief in community and the importance of
we'll come back to this and design some programs on this. Finally, from Birmingham, Frank Barker Jr., the founding pastor of one of the flagship congregations of the Presbyterian Church in America, PCA, died on December 27th. He would have turned 90 this month. Barker started Briarwood Presbyterian Church in a storefront, grew it to a congregation of more than 4,000 by the time he retired in 1999, making it one of Alabama's first megachurches and a strong example of the PCA's commitment to evangelism. And then another death. Jay Weaver, age 42, has died. Weaver played bass for the popular Christian band Big Daddy Weave. Weaver had endured decades of health problems, including the loss of both legs in 2016. We send out our sympathies to both families and the network of fans, both for the preacher and the musician. Were you familiar with either one of
I'm
these
sorry to hear
names?
of these.
What?
I
Tom?
was going to say, Dwight, I'm sorry to hear of these deaths. Frank Barker obviously accomplished a lot in growing that congregation. You said that he retired. What, in 1999? Did it continue? Did the congregation continue in strong fashion
Oh,
after
it's
his
still a
retirement?
strong congregation, and my reporting there did not bring out fully the emergence of the PCA, the Presbyterian Church in America, which was a conservative split from the Presbyterian Church USA, which
Right.
is the mainline church that is headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky. Now it used to be in New York, but the Presbyterian Church USA is the mainline progressive wing of the Presbyterian movement, and the PCA is one of several conservative split-offs from that, driven by the familiar issues of women in ministry, ecumenism, abortion, gay and lesbian issues that have split so many denominations, including the one I'm in. You know, I grew up Southern Baptist and I'm now affiliated with the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship.
Yeah, there have been a few splits in American religious history.
Yes, in world history. That's
No
the
doubt.
news. Yeah.
And Big Daddy Weave, I wasn't familiar with that band. I checked out a video, and I was struck by seeing Jay Weaver in the video in a wheelchair,
In a
and I
wheelchair,
thought it
yes.
was cool. You typically don't see that in a rock music
Yeah,
video.
you don't. But at least he had a profession that he could pursue from a wheelchair and did so for a number of years. That's the news in the Meeting House, brought to you by our friends at Perfecto Coffee. Order your coffee from perfectocoffeeinc.com. I'm going to be back in just a minute for more conversation with Tom Krattenmaker about today, the anniversary of the attack on Congress. You're in the Meeting House, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I am Dwight A. Moody, the creator and host of the Meeting House, here today with my friend, colleague, fellow journalist, Tom Krattenmaker of New Haven, Connecticut. Tom, you may know that today is Epiphany, and it begins the season of Epiphany on the Christian calendar. Always January the 6th. One of the things that's celebrated on the day of Epiphany is the coming of what the Bible calls the Magi, or the wise men from the East, looking for Jesus. And you perhaps know that story in the Bible, the Gospel of Matthew. They came asking, where is he that's born King of the Jews? Herod got jealous, and later, according to the gospel, tried to find Jesus and exterminate his life because he understood it as a threat to his own ruling. That's Epiphany. Again, an alternative way to celebrate today, as opposed to the sadness brought about by the insurrection. And before we get back to the insurrection, I want to say that tomorrow in Brunswick, Georgia, is the sentencing of the three men.
Yes.
Travis and Greg McMichael, and their friend Roddy Bryan, convicted of killing Ahmaud Arbery. And I want to say that their conviction, along with the conviction of Derek Chauvin in the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, have been very important events in the cultural, legal, and political life in the United States. And these murders were videotaped, generated enormous public interest and public pressure on authorities to find and arrest, prosecute these men who did the killing. In Minneapolis, of course, it was a policeman. And the whole controversy down in Brunswick, Georgia, which is the county where my home is on St. Simon's Island. The whole controversy was the fact that it was 75 days, I think, before these men were even arrested. Had it not been for public pressure, the local district attorney, any of the district attorneys would not have acted, did not act until there was pressure from the state, until the Georgia Bureau of Investigation got involved. And this was a tragedy on many fronts. That district attorney lost her bid for re-election. And there's been significant legal changes in the state of Georgia because of this. But the broader issue is that all of this is part of the gradual reckoning related to race in America.
Yes.
Part of this is also the 1619 Project, a project that is literary in nature and historical in nature, producing materials to reframe American history, taking into account the marginalized peoples and their experiences. But as you know, Tom, there's pushback to this. It's gotten associated with what is called critical race theory. And there's a pushback called Project 1776, which is something President Trump set in motion. Their website reads like this: "We are a political action committee dedicated to electing school board members nationwide who want to reform our public education system by promoting patriotism and pride in American history. We are committed to abolishing critical race theory and the 1619 Project from public school curriculum," end quote.
Yeah, we should talk sometime too about the meaning of that term patriotism.
Yes.
And you're talking about the racial reckoning, not at all unrelated to our other big theme today, which is January 6th.
Sure.
But it's really upsetting to me to reflect on where we are now on this matter of racial reckoning. You recall in the months following the murder of George Floyd, these protests were happening, white people out there as well as people of color. There seemed to be a new momentum and determination to see our country finally reckon with the racism that's in our history and in our present moment, and really strive for justice and make real progress. The moment seemed right. And there's been such a fierce backlash.
Yes.
It feels like that moment is gone. Not in every way, thankfully, but in terms of like the big picture and the momentum, maybe that was predictable, because people more knowledgeable than I will say that whenever there's progress, there's always backlash and pushback.
It's very reminiscent of what happened after the Civil War. The Civil War, with
Absolutely.
the emancipation and the freeing of the slaves, was a big step forward. And Reconstruction was a big step forward. But then there was pushback from the white establishment in the South. And it was like it was 4 steps forward, 2 steps backward. And for the next 100 years, this pushback, this resistance to the full integration of Black people into American society dominated Black life, largely in the South, but really throughout the nation. And we're seeing the very same thing happen again. It's the resurgence of white Christian America feeling that they're preeminent place in the United States is being threatened by this attention to the marginalized people. And so they framed it as a new surge of patriotism, but most of us think of it as simply a new surge of racism.
Definitely. Or being anti-racist. There is this backlash, and it's so frustrating because these opponents of progress are so good at grabbing certain ideas and phrases and then distorting them
Yes.
and weaponizing them. That was done very, very deliberately and effectively, sadly, with critical race theory. I mean, there was a guy, I don't remember his name right now, but he's been interviewed about his very deliberate effort to grab that term, to make it widely heard and misunderstood and distorted, to become sort of a rallying cry, to the point where if there's a conversation about race and you say CRT, that like ends the conversation and blows everything out of the water.
Yeah, it is a malicious a use of a legitimate phrase to galvanize an emotional reaction. To the changes that are underway in American society. Some of which involve race, some of which involve religion, some of which involve politics, and
the rights of women and LGBTQ people and other groups that have just been not welcome at the table.
Right. And what has happened in this whole religious movement, I'm launching today this focus on what I call the Christian crusade to change America. And they use language like, we want to restore America. We want to renew America. As a matter of fact, there's a conference this weekend called The Renewal, Restoring America's Founding Covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And their material says this, quote, God made a covenant with Israel, but America made a covenant with God. The renewal will be a faith-focused day that's actually this Saturday, the 8th, a faith-focused day of heritage, history, praise, worship, and prayer dedicated to the American renewal of the covenant the Pilgrims made with God 4 centuries ago. That is, here is religious language, religious traditions, religious heritage, religious imagery being used to undergird essentially a cultural and political movement to push back against all of the progress that we've made in our modern democracy, to make it more plural, more open, more free, more available to people who have been marginalized people for centuries. And this is what I call the Christian crusade, and much of it is wrapped up in race, as you know, Tom, and as you pointed out a little earlier, is connected with this whole thing, the whole insurrection.
Yeah, well, I think that the phrase "Make America Great Again" is part of this. It's a nod to that. Like, what is the great that Trump and his supporters are talking about when they say "make it great again"? Yes. And the fact that they say "again," that's a crucial word in that phrase, because it implies that we used to be this certain way, and then they took it away from us.
Yes.
And they, of course, have become the enemies. It's actually very effective and kind of brilliant in an evil way. I mean, I hate to give praise to something as effective when it's used for such foul purposes, but that phrase has been very effective, and it saddens me that
I agree. Well, it
got
a president elected,
and that people fall for it.
Yes,
but that is the connection. It saddens me too because, as we talked about earlier in the show, faith has so much to offer, and the values of Christianity and Jesus have so much to offer. And it's tragic that they're being used for counter purposes, and that they get so far with it too.
We saw this crusade, and we're thinking about the insurrection of last year, and about whether people think it could happen again, and whether some kind of civil war is possible, is probable, is likely, or is already underway.
I should tell you about the email I got from somebody just 2 days ago.
Tell us.
I'll tell you now.
Yeah.
Well, I had a piece in USA Today last week.
Right. Tell us about it.
And well, it was talking about the extreme polarization and the fact that so much of it is based on each side misunderstanding the other, i.e., thinking the other side is way more extreme than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't by accident. Political operatives, especially on the right, have tried to create this picture of liberals that is really demonic. I mean, it would have you believe that liberals are just horrible people who are going to absolutely tear down the country. And so in more conservative America, liberals are held in great contempt, but it's based on an extremely distorted set of facts and other ideas about who liberals are. And I talked about how what a tragedy it would be if we fell into some kind of civil war based on a false understanding of the other side and what we were up against. So I've been talking to my friends about this for years, Dwight, like asking, do you think we could have a civil war, or what would that look like? How would it happen operationally? Well, I got after my column, somebody in California who saw it emailed me and said, Tom, we're already in a civil war. And he cited different things that are happening. I think he talked about the way Mitch McConnell torpedoed the Merrick Garland nomination for the Supreme Court. He talked about a series of extremely aggressive Republican political moves that to this guy constituted a civil war. Not a shooting war, but definitely civil war. And so, yeah, I mean, it depends on how you define the term. According to this guy's definition of what civil war would mean and look like, we're already in one. But I don't agree with that. But I do think it's a frightening possibility. And I see more and more about it in the rhetoric and in op-ed columns and in news articles. People are talking about it more and fearing it more. In that poll that you showed me, Dwight, a lot of Americans are afraid that January 6th could happen again.
Yes, I think that's the point. 59%.
And part of the experience we had a year ago is that we couldn't believe it was happening.
Yeah.
We thought that, no, this kind of thing doesn't happen in the United States.
But now most Americans think it could happen again.
Well, they're right, though. They're right to think that, and we need to be vigilant.
There's no question this is true. And many people think there is a silent civil war going on, using not guns, but manipulation of the laws and institution of new laws, like down in Georgia, to suppress the majority. Well, I'm going to be talking about all of this every week for several months, with some exceptions, but on what I call the Christian crusade to change America. Some of it gathered up in that phrase, making America great again, but it's a broader and deeper than that. And we're going to be talking about it, including probably the next time you're online with me, the first week of February. Tom, I want to thank you for being my guest today and for helping me talk through these news stories, especially on this most important day.
Thanks for having me on, Dr. Moody. Thanks for the work you're doing.
God bless you. I'll be back in just a minute with my commentary, a humorous look at the difficulty I've had in moving during the holidays. Let's take a break. I've spent the holidays moving. The owner of the condo in which I have lived for the last 12 months decided to sell my condo and the one adjacent to mine. Quote, I'm going to buy a beach cottage for my wife, end quote, he said to me when he called me. I said to him, I already own a beach house, referring to my home on St. Simon's Island. Well, it's not really a beach house. It's closer to the marsh than the beach. We've actually thought about turning it into an Airbnb. If we do that, we'll join the mad rush of homeowners everywhere to accommodate people with too much money looking to enjoy the good life anywhere close to some center of cultural or natural attraction. Which is why I had a hard time finding anywhere to move in or near Hendersonville, North Carolina. It's a first-class region for living the good life. Mountains, streams, trails everywhere, plus the Biltmore House and lots of mountain music. But the excruciating task of moving has pushed me to a very difficult decision. First, let me explain what I've had to move. Boxes full of 50 years of ministerial memorabilia, correspondence, sermons, notes, articles, manuscripts, unpublished of course, pictures, including more than a few already framed and once hanging on the wall somewhere, cards and letters from both kind and critical parishioners, certificates, diplomas, magazines, books, and more books. Add to that boxes and boxes of family pictures and childhood stuff. I found a Valentine's Day card sent to me in the 6th grade. I kept it because it's truly a wonderful poem. Would you for a nickel or a stick of dime, a stick of gum? That's the way it begins. I can quote the whole thing. Would you like to buy it? I've decided to sell all of it. I've been encouraged in this matter by reading what others are doing with their accumulated life's work. For instance, Bruce Springsteen just sold his entire music catalog to Sony Music for $500 million. Now, I know that's more than my library will command. Last year, Bob Dylan sold his music, dating back to the 1960s, to Universal Music Group. He got $400 million for it. Others are joining this trend, Neil Young and Fleetwood Mac and Motley Crue, and now Dwight A. Moody. I used to think my children or grandchildren might want something I have. I wish I had more documents and books and pictures from my father and his father. And then sometimes I imagine some library or archive would find my stuff irresistibly important. Maybe Georgetown College, where I've been in succession a student, a graduate, a trustee, a faculty member, and a donor over the last 50 years since I graduated. This could be an opportunity for my friend and colleague, Rosemary Allen, just named president of the college. She could start her tenure with a press conference. Quote, I'm thrilled to begin my service as your president with announcing that we have acquired, through the generosity of a wealthy donor, the complete library and papers of a 1972 graduate. No, that's not going to happen. But when I see her in May for the golden anniversary reunion of my class of 1972, I'll give her a copy of my self-published book. It's About Time, a memoir of ministry at Georgetown College. She better take it now because otherwise it's going into sale. I've secured an agent who, even as I write, is preparing a catalog of my collected works. Morgan Freeman has agreed to voice over the video describing this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for some publishing house, some movie studio. Now, I know some of you are surprised I mentioned the movies. That just means you don't know my family very well. We've had more life drama than all the Hollywood movies of 2021 combined. I'll tell you the truth, what really set my mind in this sell it all and retire direction is a song, a John Prine song. Well, actually, Shel Silverstein wrote the lyrics, but Mr. Prine put it to music, and that's who I heard first sing it. You're not surprised, are you? I feel about my stuff just like they did about the old guitar. Quote, this guitar is for sale. I'll let her go cheap. She's pretty to look at, but she don't earn her keep. She can roar like the west wind. She can weep, she can wail, but the tunes that she plays just ain't selling today. This guitar is for sale. She lay close beside me on cold winter nights. She got me in trouble and she won me some fights. She'll tell you some stories about junkyards and jails and a fool with a song and a dream that went wrong. But hard times and trouble's been dogging our tail. So if you've got the dough, buddy, take her and go. This guitar is for sale. This guitar is for sale. And so is my stuff. I'm just giving you a heads up. I'm Dwight Moody in the Meetinghouse. I'll be back in just a minute. You've been in the Meetinghouse with me today, your host, Dr. Dwight A. Moody, coming to you from Travelers Rest, South Carolina. I like the name. I travel a lot and I need some rest. This is just north of Greenville, South Carolina, near Furman University. Have you ever been to Furman University? A beautiful campus, a long history as an influential religion-based school, now liberal arts university. Thank you for listening and watching today. Happy New Year to all of you. I encourage you to visit our website at themeetinghouse.net. You may want to subscribe to our newsletter. I send it out every Wednesday evening. It has a lot of what we do on the show, but not everything, and it has other stuff. Sometimes I read my commentaries that I send out in the newsletter, but I don't always have time on the show. But you can visit the newsletter. I visit my website at themeetinghouse.net. You can read all the old commentaries and book reviews, listen to any of the podcasts. This show will be up as a podcast in just a few hours. You could join the Circle of 70. I started that when I was 70 years old, just about a year ago. You can send a gift to the Meetinghouse. You can support what we do. You know, religion media is dominated by right-wing, fundamentalist type of religion that's supporting all this Make America Great Again and supporting this crusade to take over America, starting with school boards and state legislatures, pulpits and podiums, Congress, the media, the White House. They want to turn us back. They miss the white Christian America that they think we had. They forget about all the ugliness that has attended American history over the years, the way we've treated Native Americans, the way we've treated immigrants, the way we've treated minority groups. You can send your support. I need it. You can go to our page, themeetinghouse.net/support, and learn about how you can support us. Thank you for listening today in Glenn County, Georgia, 97.5 FM, 94.7 FM, and on SSC Live TV through the broadcast ministry of St. Stephen's Baptist Church of Louisville, Kentucky. It's also on the Meetinghouse Facebook page and on my personal Facebook page. Thanks to engineer Everett Armstrong in the studio in the Golden Isles of Georgia, to Alex Mattingly in Louisville and Lexington, where it's snowing up a storm right now. Thank you to Tom Krattenmaker, where he's in Connecticut and they're going to get 4 to 6 inches, he told me. Regardless of where you are, do justice, love mercy, walk with God. Drink some coffee, order some coffee from perfectocoffeeinc.com. Pray for the soul of America. Be kind to someone today. This is the Meetinghouse. I'm your host, Dwight A. Moody. Have a great day.
You have been in the Meetinghouse with host Dwight A. Moody. Thank you for watching or listening today. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net for more news, reviews, commentaries, and conversation on religion